Turn on any news network right now and you'll see Iran. You'll see stories of destruction, of war, of oil prices, of drone strikes, of the Revolutionary Guard. There's so much going on in Iran right now. And thus, Iran has become, especially in the Western media landscape, almost a symbol. A one-dimensional cutout of a country, a regime, a threat, and a problem that needs to be solved. But when a country of almost 90 million people gets reduced to its worst headlines, something essential gets lost. Because the country gets flattened, its people get erased, and its land seems to disappear. And this is a massive shame, because Iran's land and its geography is one of the most extraordinary, complex, and misunderstood on our planet. Because Iran is a country where you can ski in the morning and reach a rainforest by nightfall. It's a place where ancient salt deserts are so vast they have their own weather systems. It's a place where cities have existed for millennia, where volcanic peaks scrape the sky at over 5,500 meters. Iran isn't small, Iran isn't homogeneous, and Iran isn't simple. So today, let's put those geopolitics aside and explore the fascinating and wonderful geography of Iran. Iran covers approximately 1.6 million square kilometers. It's the 17th largest country on Earth. In the context of the Middle East, it's enormous. It's at a hinge point between the Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia, and the Caucasus region. Two major bodies of water define its coastlines. To the north, we have the Caspian Sea. It's technically a lake, but it's a lake so large it behaves like an inland sea, with its own currents, its own ecology, and its own storms. To the south lies the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, which opens towards the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. This area is home to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important geopolitical choke points on Earth. And this dual coastal axis has shaped the Iranian trade, culture, and strategic importance for thousands of years. The vast majority of the interior of the country is dominated by the Iranian Plateau, a vast elevated interior sitting at an average of about 1,000 to 1,500 meters above sea level. The interior is surrounded by mountains on multiple sides. It's drained inwards, and for the most part, it's incredibly arid. Understanding Iran means understanding that plateau, because that plateau is the Iranian heartland. If you drew a line across the top of Iran, just to the south of the Caspian Sea, you would trace one of the most dramatic mountain systems in the Middle East, the Alborz Mountains. The Alborz are a compact but ferocious range, not sprawling like the Himalayas, but dense, steep, and imposing. They run roughly east to west for about 900 kilometers, forming a near continuous wall between the Caspian coast and the interior plateau. In places, the drop from mountaintop to sea level happens in just 20 to 30 kilometers. It is one of the steepest topographic transitions anywhere on Earth. At its heart rises Mount Damavand. Now, Damavand is not just Iran's highest peak, it is the highest mountain in all of the Middle East. It is the highest volcano in all of Asia. It stands at about 5,600 meters above sea level, making Damavand taller than any mountain in the Rockies or any mountain in the Alps. Damavand is a stratovolcano, the same type as Mount Fuji or Mount Rainier. It has fumaroles, which are vents releasing volcanic gases near the summit. Iranian mythology is soaked in Damavand. In the Shahnameh, the great Persian epic poem, The monster Zahak is imprisoned beneath the mountain for eternity. The peak has been a symbol for Persian identity, resistance, and of elemental power for thousands of years. Tehran, the capital city of a population in excess of 15 million people, sits at the foot of the broader Alborz Range. The northern suburbs of Tehran climb towards 1,800 meters in elevation, meaning in the rare, clear day in Tehran, you could potentially see the peak of Damavand floating above the horizon. The Alborz also create one of Iran's most dramatic geographical contrasts. In its southern flank, we have dry, semi-arid plateau, but on the northern flanks, we have something completely different. But we'll come back to that a little bit later in the video. So if the Alborz are Iran's northern wall, the Zagros Mountains are its spine. Because the Zagros are one of the great mountain systems of the Middle East, stretching roughly 1,500 kilometers from the northwest of Iran near the border with Turkey and Iraq down through the southwest, all the way to the Strait of Hormuz in the far south. They're formed by the collision of the Arabian and Eurasian tectonic plates. Iran is one of the most seismically active countries on Earth. The Zagros fault belt is still compressing. The Arabian plate is still pushing north, crumpling the crust. This means earthquakes. Iran experiences major earthquakes regularly, and they have been devastating throughout history. The 2003 earthquake in Bam, in southeastern Iran, killed more than 26,000 people and destroyed one of the world's most remarkable mud brick citadels in under 30 seconds. But the Zagros Mountains aren't just a geological phenomenon. They're also home to one of Iran's most important human landscapes, because the valleys between the ridges are fertile, watered by rivers and snowmelt, and they have been inhabited for almost incomprehensible spans of time. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Zagros foothills were one of the earliest sites of agricultural development in the world, possibly around 10,000 BC. According to archaeologists, the agricultural revolution, one of the pivotal transitions in all of human history, has deep roots right in these mountains. Today, the Zagros Mountains are home to a rich diversity of ethnic groups, Kurds, Lurs, and Qashqai, many of whom have maintained semi-nomadic traditions, moving their flocks between summer and winter pastures along routes that have been used for thousands of years. The mountains both isolated and preserved many of these communities, creating a patchwork of languages, dialects, and cultures, all within a single country. The highest peaks in the Zagros reach about 4,400 meters. They receive significant snowfall in winters, and that snow feeds the rivers that flow westward into Iraq and southwards into the Persian Gulf. And then there's the geological treasure beneath these Zagros Mountains that has shaped the modern world far more than most people realize. Because the same tectonic compression that folded these mountains also trapped vast reserves of petroleum in the rock layers below. The Zagros foothills of southwestern Iran contain some of the richest oil fields on Earth. The discovery of oil at the Masjed Suleiman in 1908, the first commercial oil discovery in the Middle East, set in motion a chain of events that shaped the entire 20th century. But if we step back from the mountain ranges and look at the whole region of Iran from above, what you see dominating the interior is the Iranian Plateau, a high, enclosed basin that covers the central and eastern parts of the country. This is not all flat land. The plateau sits at elevations between 1,000 to 1,500 meters on average. It itself is interrupted by smaller mountain ranges, ridges, and basins. But compared to the dramatic peaks that surround it, it feels vast and horizontal, a world unto itself. The plateau is essentially a closed drainage basin. Rivers that flow into it from the surrounding mountains don't reach the sea. They flow inward, toward the lowest points, where they evaporate or sink into the earth, or pool into seasonal lakes and vast salt flats. This area is the origin of Iran's two great deserts. The Dasht-e-Kavir, which translates to roughly as the Great Salt Desert. It occupies a large swath of north-central Iran. It's not a sand desert in the way most people imagine deserts. The Dasht-e-Kavir is primarily a salt flat, a kavir, formed by the evaporation of ancient lake waters. The surface is a shimmering crust of salt and minerals, broken in places in polygonal patterns, cracked and crystalline. Temperatures in the Dasht-e Kavir are extreme. Summer days can regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius, while winter nights can plunge below freezing. Rain is almost non-existent here. It is a landscape of beautiful but radical hostility. Yet, even here, life persists, scattered oasis towns, sustained by deep wells and the ancient water engineering that is one of Iran's most underappreciated civilizational achievements. Southeast of the Dasht-e Kavir lies something even more extreme, the Dasht-e-Lut. Lut means barren. This is one of the most otherworldly landscapes on Earth. It covers roughly 80,000 square kilometers of southeastern Iran, and it holds the record for the highest land surface temperature ever recorded on the planet. Because in 2005, NASA satellites measured a surface temperature of 70.7 degrees Celsius in the Dasht-e-Lut. But despite the harsh weather, the Lut Desert is also strikingly beautiful. Its most iconic features are the Kaluts, enormous wind-sculpted rock and sediment formations that rise from the desert floor like ruined castles, eroded into dramatic ridges and fins by millennia of wind. Some Kaluts reach heights over 150 meters, and from the air, they resemble a vast alien cityscape. Now, despite this harsh beauty, very few tourists make it here. The landscape is barely accessible, and the conditions are brutal. And Iran's geopolitical isolation means it remains one of the least visited World Heritage Sites on Earth, which is, depending on how you look at it, either a tragedy or kind of for the better. Living on the Iranian plateau meant confronting an enormous problem: water. Because the plateau receives very little rainfall, the rivers that do exist are seasonal and unreliable. The mountains receive snowfall in winter, but that water is often far from where people actually need it. For any civilization to survive and flourish here, an extraordinary solution was required, and that solution was the Qanat. The Qanat is an underground aqueduct, a gently sloping tunnel dug by hand through rock and earth. Now, these tunnels channel groundwater from the base of a mountain range across the desert to a village or city possibly kilometers away. Now, this design uses something we all know of: gravity. And because of this, there's no pumps required or any mechanical assistance. Qanats were being constructed in Iran at least 3,000 years ago. The technology spread throughout the ancient world, to North Africa, to Spain, and Central Asia. But nowhere was it developed more extensively than in Iran. So when people talk about Iranian civilization's resilience, they often point to literature or philosophy or even art. But the Qanat may be the most eloquent expression of that resilience: the sheer refusal to accept that their desert is uninhabitable. So let's leave the Iranian plateau aside and head north to the Caspian coast. Now, this region is entirely different to the interior plateau, because the regions of Gilan and Mazandaran receive between 600 and 1900 millimeters of rain every year. In a country whose interior is defined by aridity, this is almost shocking. The moisture comes off the Caspian Sea. It rises when it hits the outboards and dumps as rain and snow in the northern slopes. The result is a landscape of extraordinary lushness: dense, broadleaf forests, rice paddies, and tea plantations. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this region, I recommend you watch my video on the Hyrcanian forests of northern Iran. In that video, I go into much greater detail about these exact forests, their ecology, their biology, and the geology that created these forests in the first place. And these are among the oldest forests in the northern hemisphere. They are remnants of the great temperate forests that covered much of Eurasia before the last glacial maximum. And while most of these forests were destroyed by glaciation, the Caspian coast was sheltered, and so its ancient forest ecology survived. Some of these tree species have been growing in this region for possibly more than 40 million years. The Caspian coast is also one of the most densely populated parts of Iran. The combination of fertile soil, reliable water, and relatively mild climate has made it an agricultural heartland for many years. The cities of Rasht and Sari sit in this green strip, bustling and prosperous in ways that feel quite different from the dry cities of the plateau. So many Iranians from the interior often vacation on the Caspian coast. They're drawn by the greenery, seafood, and humidity that, after the dryness of Tehran and Isfahan, feels like a kind of relief. But let's leave behind the northern coast and head to the southern coast, the Persian Gulf coast. And this is a completely different world. The Persian Gulf coast is hot, relentlessly and oppressively hot, with summer temperatures regularly exceeding 45 degrees Celsius and humidity levels that make outdoor activity dangerous for hours at a time. The climate here is one of the most harshest for human habitation in possibly the world. The Persian Gulf itself is a shallow, semi-enclosed body of water, at its deepest only around 90 meters. Now this shallowness, combined with its high temperatures and high salinity, makes it a unique marine environment, home to coral reefs, dugongs, sea turtles, and some of the most productive fisheries on Earth. At the eastern end of the Gulf, where it narrows to as little as 55 kilometers between the Iranian shore and the Musandam Peninsula of Oman, lies the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. Approximately 20 million barrels of oil pass through it every single day, roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption. Most of the tanks leaving Saudi Arabia, and almost all leaving Kuwait, Iraq, and UAE must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran sits on the northern end of this strait. Now, this geographical fact alone explains an enormous amount of the geopolitical tension surrounding this country. Iran has the capacity, should it choose to exercise it, to dramatically disrupt the global oil supply by simply the virtue of where it is. It can potentially block all of, or a huge portion of the Strait of Hormuz altogether, blocking 20% of the world's oil supply from leaving the Persian Gulf. But despite Iran's access to large bodies of water, it still struggles with fresh water. One of the country's rivers is the Karun River. It flows through the Zagros Mountains in the southwest. It's Iran's largest and most powerful river, and one of the very few in the country that is navigable by boat. It drains into the Shat al-Arab waterway on the Iraq border and ultimately reaches the Persian Gulf. Another river is the Zayandeh River. It flows through the city of Isfahan, and for centuries it made that city possible. Its waters were carefully managed and distributed among farmers, villages, and urban uses through a sophisticated system of weirs and allocation rights that was codified in the medieval period and remained in use until modern times. But in recent decades, the Zayandeh has been running dry. Upstream dams, agricultural extraction, population growth, and climate change have reduced the river to a trickle for much of the year. The site of Isfahan's magnificent bridges spanning an empty riverbed has become one of the most important symbols of Iran's water crisis, a crisis that is arguably the country's most serious long-term threat. Aside from the current situation, of course, Lake Urmia in northwestern Iran was once the largest lake in the Middle East, a vast, shallow, hypersaline lake famed for its flamingos. Its unique color was caused by brine shrimp and halophilic algae. At its height, it covered over 5,000 square kilometers. Today, Lake Urmia has shrunk by more than 90%. Boza Lake is now mostly a salt flat, blinding white stretching to the horizon where water used to be. Dust storms carry toxic salt and dust from the exposed lakebed into the surrounding cities. The ecological collapse has been rapid and devastating. Now, if you are interested in learning more about Lake Urmia's downfall, I've actually done a previous video on this exact subject, where I explore the lake itself, its geography, its history, and its problems in greater detail. The causes of the degradation of Lake Urmia are multiple. Upstream dams that cut off rivers feeding the lake, massive groundwater extraction for agriculture, and a prolonged regional drying driven by long-term climate change. The Iranian government has made various restoration efforts with limited success. Iran is not unique in facing these kind of problems, but its geography, a mostly arid plateau surrounded by mountains that capture most of the available moisture, means it has less margin for error than almost anywhere else. Perhaps surprisingly to some of you, more than 75% of Iranians live in cities. Iran is, by global standards, a highly urbanized country, a fact that surprises many people who imagine it as a land of rural traditions and ancient nomadic cultures. Both of those things do exist and are real, But the Iran of today is overwhelmingly an urban one. The capital and largest city is Tehran. The city proper has a population of about 9 to 10 million, while the greater metro area, depending on how you draw the lines, approaches 16 million. It's the largest city in Western Asia and one of the 30 largest cities in the world. Tehran sits on a gentle south-facing slope on the foot of the Alborz. The city tilts ever so slightly, so that its northern districts climb towards the mountains, are noticeably cooler and wealthier than the flat, hot southern districts near the desert's edge. This topographic gradient has become a social and economic gradient. North Tehran is leafy, affluent, and secular in character, while South Tehran is denser, poorer, and more conservative. The mountains are not just scenery, they kind of shape the social geography of this city. Tehran's history is also quite fascinating. Before the 18th century, it was a modest town. The Qajar dynasty made it their capital in 1796, and it has grown roughly continuously ever since then, and explosively in the 20th century, when oil revenues funded rapid industrialization and rural Iranians flooded into the large city. The result is a city of layers: old bazaars, modernist towers, leafy green-lined avenues, rooftop restaurants, and traffic jams. And somewhat above it all, on some clear days, the snow-covered pyramid of Damavand. Another important and historic city is Isfahan. It sits in a broad valley in central Iran, watered by the Zayandeh River and surrounded by semi-arid terrain on all sides. Positioned at the crossroads of trade routes, it was one of the great cities of the medieval Islamic world. Under Shah Abbas I in the late 16th and 17th centuries, Isfahan became the capital of the Safavid Empire and was transformed into one of the most beautiful cities on earth. The great Naqsh-e-Jahan Square, one of the largest public squares anywhere in the world, surrounded by a royal mosque, an imperial bazaar, a palace, and a smaller mosque, is a masterpiece of urban planning and architecture. The tile work alone, the deep blues and turquoise that cover the domes and minarets, is among the greatest achievements of Islamic art. There is a beautiful Persian saying, Isfahan Nesf-e-Jahan, meaning Isfahan is half the world. It was coined at the peak of the city's glory when visitors arrived from across Asia and Europe and found it almost impossibly grand. The saying still rings true when you stand in the square at dusk and watch the colors of the tilework shift as the light fades. If we move just to the south, we find Shiraz, another historic city. It sits in the high mountain valley in the Zagros at around 1500 meters elevation. This higher elevation gives it a gentler climate than the plains surrounding it, relatively mild summers, cold winters, and enough moisture for the gardens and orchards that have made the city famous. Shiraz is the city of Persian poetry. Hafiz and Saidi, two of the greatest poets in the Persian language, and by extension, two of the greatest poets in human history, both lived and are buried here. Their tombs are pilgrimage sites for Iranians. People visit here not out of religious obligation, but out of literary devotion, to sit with the words of men who wrote 700 years ago and still speak to something essential about love, loss, and beauty. Just outside Shiraz, less than an hour's drive away, lie the ruins of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire, the greatest empire the ancient world had seen at its height. Founded by Darius the Great around 515 BC, Persepolis was a statement in stone, a vast complex of palaces, audience halls, and processional stairways decorated with relief carvings showing delegations from across the empire bringing tribute. It was burned by Alexander the Great in 330 BC, an act of destruction that still stings in Iranian cultural memory. The ruins that remain are still breathtaking. In the northeast, at the edge of where the Iranian plateau meets and approaches Central Asia, sits Mashhad, Iran's second largest city, and one of the most visited pilgrimage destinations in the world. It's home to the shrine of Imam Reza, the 8th Imam of Twelver Shia Islam. It draws somewhere between 20 and 30 million visitors a year, a number that dwarfs the entire population of many countries. Mashhad sits on the old Silk Route, connecting Persia to Central Asia and China, and its bazaars still carry echoes from that ancient connectivity. And in the far northwest, In a high volcanic basin near the borders of Turkey and Azerbaijan lies Tabriz, one of the great historic cities of the Islamic world. It served as the capital of several kingdoms like the Safavid Empire and the Qajar dynasty. Tabriz sits in a region that has changed hands so many times over millennia that its cultural identity is layered and complex. Turkic, Persian, and Azerbaijani influences woven together. Its covered bazaar, one of the largest in the world, was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2010. Each of these cities is a lesson in how geography shapes urban life. Each one found its location for a reason, whether it's a river, a valley, a trade route, or a mountain pass. And each one is built upon that geographical foundation on a distinct identity that persists to this day. Now, apart from these cities I just mentioned, Iran is still home to several other large cities, like Evaz in the southwest or Qom in the center of the country. We started this video with headlines, threats and tensions, crisis and conflicts. The Iran that dominates the news cycle, the Iran that has been flattened into a symbol. But its geography tells a different story. Or rather, geography tells a much older and much larger story. It tells the story of a plateau enclosed by mountains that forced the people who lived there to innovate, to engineer water through rock, to build cities in the middle of deserts, to trade across thousands of kilometers of difficult terrain. And it tells the story of amazing and beautiful cities. Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz. Iran is 90 million people living on one of the most extraordinary pieces of land on this planet. So the next time you see Iran in the headlines, remember, there's a country behind that coverage, a vast, complex, eternally contradictory, breathtakingly beautiful, and unique country. It's home to a resilient people that can hopefully overcome the challenges that they face right now. And as always, if you like content like this, be sure to give this video a like, follow my channel if you haven't done so already, and if you liked this video, make sure to take a look at these two videos popping up on your screen right now. I'm sure if you like this, you're probably going to like these two as well. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.